Can I ask you this? How would Rondé Barber do in today's NFL with the way all the rules are?
I've talked to some younger wide receivers, and they're like, "You couldn't cover me." I'm like, "Of course I could cover you. I'd find a way. I'd above the neck your ass somehow."
Joining us today on NFL Spotlight, he is one of the great defensive backs in NFL history, played his entire 16-year career with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2023. It is the great Rondé Barber. Rondé, what's up, man? Thanks for doing this. How are you?
How are you, Ari? Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be following up Lavonte David in your spotlight. The guy is awesome. So anything good you can say about Lavonte, I will corroborate wholeheartedly, and probably tell you why he's even better than what you said he was. Great dude. Glad you had him on.
No, absolutely. Lavonte was our first spotlight guest. I mean, he's been a great Buccaneer, and he's been his entire career in Tampa Bay, similar to you. But before I get to this current Buccaneers team with Lavonte and some of the other guys there, I do want to talk about you. Like I told you before we started recording, this is the NFL Spotlight Show. We put a recognition on people in the NFL, past and present, who really deserve more attention. And you're a Hall of Famer, like I said, so there may not be any more recognition needed than that. But I really don't think like the general public, especially like this next generation, truly understands how talented you were and what you did in your career. And I'm just going to let you sit back for a second and let me just go through all of it. Okay. Give me a second here. All right, Rondé.
Yes.
We're going to do this. All right. 16 years with one team, like I said in the introduction, over 1,200 career tackles, 47 career interceptions. You had 14 touchdowns, which is a crazy number. Your 28 sacks are the most ever by any defensive back. You, of course, won a Super Bowl. You had 15 forced fumbles, 12 fumble recoveries. You started 215 straight games. No DB in NFL history has ever done more than that. Twice you intercepted 3 passes in a single game, which is crazy. You're in the Buccaneers Ring of Honor. You're in the NFL Hall of Fame. You're in the 2000s All-Decade Team. I could just go on and on. 5-time All-Pro, 5-time Pro Bowl. Probably should have been more than that, but it is unbelievable what you did. The fact that you were not a first ballot Hall of Famer tells me all I need to know about how underrated you were in your career. Like when I just go through all of that, I'm sure there are listeners who maybe started watching football after you retired who listened to that and were like, holy cow, what did he just say? What goes through your mind when I just go through all those numbers?
Man, when I retired from the NFL and after the 2012 year, most players will probably tell you this. You end up taking inventory. You just can't help it. Like, okay, that chapter of my life, for me, it was a big chapter because it was 16 years. But you start taking inventory and you start wondering, what does it all mean? Obviously, I was fortunate enough to win a Super Bowl, play in one city, which was, never a goal. But at the end of my career, I realized it was something I'm glad that I did. But, invariably you start looking at your numbers and, enough people start saying you should be in Hall of Fame. People were saying that before I retired, but when you're done, they finally start, accumulating all the stats and everything else. And, I did that with some friends. I did it with my eventual Hall of Fame presenter, Ira Kaufman. And we looked at it and said, nobody's even close to these numbers. And I think I knew it at the time, but I didn't really realize just how unique it was. And so to answer your question, I think when people hear those numbers, they almost seem not possible, especially when you look at the way some of the guys who we consider the best in the business they're playing now, they'll never reach those numbers. And that's neither here nor there. But those numbers are unattainable. And I guess I didn't realize how good they were till the very end and started really taking that inventory on what I had done. And I'm glad that I'm finally recognized for it. I mean, if you ask me, I don't lack confidence. And so I was telling people that, I was probably better than anybody ever gave me credit for in my entire career, even the years when I made Pro Bowls and All Pros. And led the league in interceptions. But it is what it was. It was what it was at that time, and it drove me. So it still drives me a little bit. I use it as a reason to tell people about, you don't have to be the most popular guy to be considered one of the best. And I think that defines me a little bit.
You ever like think about what was the reason that you didn't get more attention as one of those top guys? Like making the Hall of Fame is great, but again, waiting, 5, 6 years the way you did, it probably shouldn't have been like that. Is it maybe a Tampa Bay thing? Like I talked about this with Levante on the show. Like Levante is one of the great linebackers in football. I think he's only made it to one Pro Bowl. It's like criminal. Doesn't make any sense, right? So, why do you think that is when it comes to Tampa Bay, where maybe the recognition isn't shown that much until maybe the career is over?
Yeah, you know what? And Tampa's not like a small market. Tampa's, I think, 11th biggest market in the country. So at least TV wise. So there's enough people that get eyeballs on Tampa, and obviously Tampa's a very popular destination on the west side of the state. I think just people discount Tampa. They just don't ever consider it, one of the great football cities. But in reality, it is. I mean, we got a bunch of colleges around here, which generate football interest. Obviously, we've got two Super Bowl champions out of Tampa. I don't know why. I don't know why people think that this is not like some of the bigger franchises in the league. I know for me, when I was playing, and this is a different conversation. We can have this about Levante because I've got very strong opinions on Levante and why people discount him. But for me, we had some early success in my career, but I played 16 years, and after 4 or 5 years, we weren't a perennial team, and that was what I would consider the middle of my career. When I started accumulating all those numbers, was right in the middle of my career, and just the longevity that I was able to play with. We went like 6 or 7 years without making a playoff, and I think it's easy for people to forget, what you've accomplished. Because I accomplished a lot in my first couple, probably year 2 to year 5, and then Tampa was kind of off the map. We weren't good. We were rotating quarterbacks. We didn't have much consistency. The defense was always kind of good, but we didn't do anything special. And I think for people to really recognize you, you got to do special and unique things. And without the media coverage or the national media coverage, people don't realize it. But Ari, I will say, man, I was one of 3 corners on the All-Decade team behind Charles Woodson and Champ Bailey. There was a lot of good corners during my era. Some of them were flash in the pans, would have big years and disappear. What separated me from all of them was my consistency and longevity and my ability to not get hurt. I didn't miss any games. And there's only one other guy that can even come close to that, and that was Charles in terms of number of games played, which is why our stats are very similar. Because we played a long time, and we didn't miss many games. But for some reason, people just didn't want to recognize the things that I did. They did eventually, so I can't complain now.
Well, we're gonna do some of that over here, but let me just go back to like the beginning of your NFL playing career because you were a third round pick and you were not, like you said in your Hall of Fame speech, you were not an ordinary defensive back. Like you were listed at 5'10", 184-ish. How
Right.
did you mentally tell yourself I'm good enough when there was all this chatter about being undersized or not being good enough or too small or whatever it was? Like what did you do to tell yourself I could do this?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you a quick story. And people that know me know this story. I obviously have a twin brother who
Mhm.
was very quickly successful at every level. Middle school, high school, college, pro. He got off to a faster start. For me, I went to high school. I didn't play my first year. I didn't play that my first year in college, which was 10th grade for us, or in high school, it was 10th grade for us. I didn't play until a guy got hurt, right? So I had to wait. Go to Virginia. Tiki's playing. I get redshirted. So again, I had to wait, right? And then come to the pros, get drafted in the 3rd round. I wasn't ready to play. I didn't really understand what it was like to be a pro. So I had to wait. I mean, I basically redshirted my first year in the NFL. So you asked that question, it's easy for me to answer because I had been through it twice before. I'd been through the I got to get better phase, and I got to work on myself phase, and I'd always come out of it on the other side very successful. It was all state in high school 3 times. I was ACC Rookie of the Year when I was at Virginia. Led the nation in interceptions that year, my rookie year, and then coming to my second year in the NFL, I knew I was going to get an opportunity, and when I did, I had a track record of finding success. So, what did I tell myself? That my time was going to come if I put the work in. And you never know if that's going to be the case, but there was always a belief system for me that it was going to work out because it had no other choice but to work out. Right. I'm not a guy that ever had a plan B. I refuse a plan B. To this day, I refuse plan B.
Hmm.
Um, if I'm going to make A work until A is no longer available. And that mentality carried me through that first year in Tampa. And then once that opportunity presented itself, I just ran with it, man, and really started telling myself, if I do more than what I think my peers are doing, then there's no way that they're going to be able to deny me. And eventually it worked out.
So one of the things that I've heard about you a lot is that you were a student of the game, and that probably helped out a lot once you got your opportunity. Like everyone
Yeah.
talks about the fact you were a film junkie. Like you even thanked the video team in your Hall of Fame speech. Like that's how deep it was.
Yeah.
Were you always like that? Did someone tell you something about film study that made you flip a switch? Like where did that love of watching film come from for you, which definitely elevated your game?
Yeah, I would say Art Marcos at Virginia was the first one that introduced it to us, and it was not necessarily to the level that it became when I got to the NFL, but we spent a lot of time watching film in college, and we were not complicated. We had 3 or 4 defenses. I think green, blue, white, and orange or something. Where that's how we called our defenses. But we did spend a lot of time studying other people, what they were going to present to us, and how those defenses could best fix those. And I'm a kind of guy that needs constant engagement. And I was curious. I was always curious about how to defeat certain schemes, or outplay different players when they have the physical or advantage over me. And I'll say that first year when I got to the NFL is when that the kind of love for watching film really exploded, and for 2 reasons. One, yes, I wanted to know what other teams were doing. I wanted to understand schemes, offenses and defensive schemes, and try to perfect it. But secondly, and probably more importantly, because I wasn't playing in games, I spent a lot of time studying myself. Like I watched practice over and over and over again, just to figure out movement skill and how to perfect those movements. And because eventually those movements were going to come into play in the games. And, I figured if I couldn't be physically bigger and better than everybody else, I could be technically better than everybody else. And I tell players that to this day, like, hey, man, yeah, watch what the Chicago Bears are doing or the Green Bay Packers are doing when you're getting ready to play them. But as you prepare yourself, study yourself. Like if you can perfect yourself, it makes that job so much easier. So really, Ari, that's where that film, junkiness came from. Because I'd go into the video room, Dave Levy's video room after practice every day, and sit there and watch myself practice against the starting offenses. And then once I got started to play and was on the first team defense, I did the same thing. It just became a routine for me, and it made me a better player. It really did. And once you watch enough of it, you realize that it's all kind of the same. All the other stuff. Watching offenses like this is just a version of this. That's this play, but a different caveat to it. And so watching me became more important than watching everybody else. And I love doing that.
That's fascinating stuff. And I feel like we only hear about the film study that players do, especially non-quarterbacks, like after they retire. Like now that Aaron Donald retired, we hear about that.
Yeah.
Luke Kuechly, when he retired, we hear about it a lot. For
Yeah.
you, whenever I watch and even talk to people about yourself, they're like, you should see how much film Rondé would watch. And now hearing you talk about watching yourself as well, it's really a whole nother level. I'm sure there are many players in today's game who probably could learn from that as well, from what you did. You mentioned your 16-year career doing it all with one team. We always hear about the Jeters and the Kobe's, players who spent their entire career with one team. You mentioned that it's something as the years went on, you realized how important was it. I guess when was that? And when your career was over, was there ever a point during that time where maybe it wasn't going to be all Tampa Bay? Is there any untold stories about that?
Yeah, and probably the first one is my first contract. I signed a 4-year deal coming out of Virginia, and that was prior. My contract came up in 2000, so prior to the 2001 year. And if you remember, intrepid Rondé Barber fans will know that 2001 year was the year that I led the league in interceptions with 10. I had 10 interceptions in 2001. Well, the year before that, in 2000, I was a free agent. After that 2000 year, I was a free agent. And Rich McKay basically told me to go test the market. There was 2 big free agents that year. History lesson. Jason Sehorn and Ray Buchanan in Atlanta. Jason Sehorn, Giants, Ray Buchanan, Atlanta, both signed $35 million total contracts. And, for me, I hadn't quite established myself on the scene, but I thought that I was kind of considered, just underneath those guys, right? But Rich McKay essentially told me to go test the market. He was like, they didn't sign me before free agency started, didn't sign me at the start of free agency. And so I had to go look. And I went to Cincinnati on a visit and realized this is not where I want to be. And I told my agent that we need to figure out some way for me to stay in Tampa. And the numbers fluctuated up and down here and there. It matters not. But I had to get interest from other teams to drive my market for Tampa. Right.
Leverage,
and Seattle was one of those teams. John Snyder, who's there now, was the assistant GM, and kind of made this play. Is Rondé going to come out to Seattle? If he comes out, we're not going to let him leave. We're going to sign him to a contract. And lo and behold, the Bucs signed me right away. My deal was half of those guys, by the way. Those 2 guys that I said. So that was one. That was one instance that I was going to be free. The other one was probably in my 31-year-old year. I was starting to realize, I knew this before, but I realized how underpaid I was, and I was willing to sit out or play out my contract that year and leave. But John Gruden was our head coach. Bruce Allen was our general manager. And he gave me my highest contract, my highest money contract when I was 31 years old in Tampa. And I think at that point, I realized there's no chance that I'm going anywhere else. This is, the love was mutual. They showed it to me. I've obviously showed it to them over the years. But the reality is I never wanted to leave. Tampa was home. The defense fit my personality, my playing personality. A lot of friends here in Tampa, in the football world, inside the front office. Great friends with our owners, and so it was never really an option. I mean, I was not one of those guys who was ever going to hold out and demand more money and try to get traded. That's a mechanism for today that wasn't even on my radar when I was playing.
Well, it's very unique to be with one team for 16 years. I don't have the exact fact check here, but I would imagine that's the longest ever for a cornerback with one team. Is that true?
So. Yeah, I would think so. I don't know that either. I'd have to fact check that because some of those older guys, the really older guys, but I know one thing, it won't happen again. There's no chance.
You could take that to the bank 100%.
There's no chance.
100%. That is never happening again. What's up, everyone? This episode is brought to you by Manscaped, the global leader in men's lifestyle and grooming. Every man knows the unbeatable feeling of a fresh barbershop shave. Now, what if I told you that you no longer have to wait weeks or even months between appointments to experience it?
Introducing Manscaped's newest innovation, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver, the game-changing tool that brings the luxury of a professional shave right into your home. I got mine this weekend, Ari, and I gotta say it's something else. Whether you're after that daily silky smooth finish or prefer to maintain a rugged 5 o'clock shadow like myself, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver is your go-to for precision and style every single time. I deal with a lot of razor burn personally, and I hate to shave all the way down, but that's good. It's all good with the Chairman Pro. Its skin-safe stubble trimmer option does that. Keeps you safe while keeping a nice shadow that looks clean and professional.
Head over to manscaped.com and join the over 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and use the code ARI, A-R-I, for 20% off plus free shipping. One of the other things about you that is very cool is that everyone is playing nickel defense nowadays. I mean, did you ever notice during your career that essentially you were the start of something where the nickel corner position became way more relevant all of a sudden, in part because of you?
Yeah, I did. And the position has always been around. Aeneas Williams played that position, also a Hall of Famer, played that position, throughout his career. He was an outside corner that moved inside and, was very productive. Obviously, he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But when I first got to Tampa, there was a guy who played ahead of me. His name was Anthony Parker. They brought him in the year I was drafted, and he started outside. He played a lot of years in the NFL up to that point. He is very productive too. I think he had a good number of interceptions for touchdowns, but his role was start outside and move inside. And we didn't have that when I came out of college. When I was at Virginia, we didn't play that way. We just had two outside corners, and the inside guys were all safeties and linebackers. And so I saw him play this role, and in my mind, I was like, I can play that role. What he's doing now, I can play that role. And I want to play that role because you get so many more opportunities to play inside. And you didn't see a lot of guys doing it, right? A lot of starting cornerbacks in the NFL at that time, they were just outside corners. They were all trying to be, Dion type players, that sit outside and take away your number one receiver, yada, yada, yada. The guys inside completely overlooked. It was where you generally put your weakest corner, right? The guy that you knew you could protect with other guys around him. But Monty's defense asked a lot more of that position. And so in 1998, when Anthony got hurt and I got a chance to play both roles, I relished playing inside. One, because I knew it was a way that I could make a lot more plays. And two, it didn't put me outside where I had to deal with some of the monsters in receivers. And I think that evolution, first me being, kind of quicker, shifty, whatever kind of interior guy that could make people miss and still make plays in and around the line of scrimmage and in the backfield, started to take notice. And then probably more importantly, Monty loved to blitz me because he knew I had a knack for finding those lanes or making people miss. There was one year, I think it was 99. Sapp always gives me crap about this, but I think through the first 3 or 4 games, I was leading the team in sacks, and he was like, "Hey, enough of these damn blitzes, man. Can we just get some green calls so the D lineman can rush and quit sending number 20?" But over those 3 or 4 years, first part of my career playing in there, what we were doing, other people tried to adapt to. They started putting a better corner inside to cover, to blitz, to be more versatile. And the coaches now that you hear profess about it, obviously the Raheems, the Mike Tomlins, Jimmy Lake, who's Raheem's defensive coordinator in Atlanta, all of them saw how we ran that position. And as the league evolved and it became more of a passing offense, became much more 3 wide receiver sets, that position became paramount. We used to see a lot more 12 personnel, big, heavy personnel throughout the game. Now you can watch a game. You watch Chicago play; they play 3 wide receivers the entire game. So it's like it's such a huge position now. And yeah, I was certainly at the forefront of it, and definitely one of the most productive guys to ever do it, if not the most productive guy to ever do it. So when you talk about the legacy of the position, I'm not scared to say it starts with me at all, because I was right at the right time. I was playing it right at the right time when the league was evolving.
I mean, I'm happy you're saying that because it's definitely true, and it's funny because when we did have Levante on here, like I asked him about himself as well, and eventually he finally was willing to pat himself on the back, and it's cool to see you do the same because you guys should, like you guys really, have done some great things, and you started something that has become so important now. And you mentioned two coaches there while you were talking. You got to see them early when they were super young. Like you had John Gruden, you had Tony Dungy, you had Monty, but two guys that you had also with you when they were still just starting were Mike Tomlin and Raheem Morris. I want to just ask you about those two guys. Mike was your DB's coach. Raheem literally worked his way up from quality control to assistant DB to DB's coach to eventually the head coach. But those two guys, when you were with them, what do you remember about those guys? And could you have envisioned them becoming head coaches, especially Mike, who has been so successful when he got started in Pittsburgh all the way till now?
Right, man. Those guys, I could talk, for eons about those guys because they owe me. Like they made it to the end. They made it in their far in their careers because they coached me. We can just put that on record right now. Mike, I'll start with Mike because, prior to Mike, Herm Edwards was my DB coach, who was great. Herm was great for me. Taught me how to be a pro. Told me how I needed to practice. Wouldn't let me skip any practice reps. He's like, take every single rep. You're going to play for us one day. This is my rookie year. You're going to play for us one day, but you need to get better. He taught me how to be a pro. But my career took off under Mike T, without a doubt. He was his first year here was that year I was telling you about when I was going to be a free agent. And we went to dinner. It was after the 2000 season, before free agency really kicked off that next year. And he's like, you're going to be here. No one else. And to the point that we were just talking about as well, he's like, nobody else does what you do. Mike was the first person to tell me that. He said, I've watched football, I've watched all these NFL teams, obviously tons of college teams where he came from. He's like, nobody does that. We need you here. I need you here to play this role. And he worked on making me a better player. He even from as good as I thought it was at the time, he turned the corner for me. He gave me a belief that I was going to be something different. And we perfected our craft together. He challenged me. I challenged him. I was always asking him for more. What more can I do? How can I be an even better player? How can I be even more impactful player? And Mike gave me all that bread and water, so to speak, that turned me into the guy that ended up being in the Hall of Fame. Now, Raheem was his assistant, and obviously he was younger. He was closer in age to me. We became buddies really quick. And Raheem's superpower is his skill relating to people. So, Mike kind of has this little standoff relationship with guys. Raheem's like the opposite. He's like on the couch with you, talking you through everything that's going on in your life and football and everything else. And then he ends up being a great coach. His personality makes him a great coach, but his knowledge makes him even better. Like it's no doubt why both of those guys are successful because of how they interact with players, and they're different, but they definitely understand how to get the best out of the guys they're working with, how to make them their best selves, as Raheem likes to say. Same could be said for Jimmy Lake, who came after Raheem in that regard. But those two guys are special. I mean, if you're around them for any moments, like 1 minute or an hour or a year, you realize how special people they are, and it's what makes them great football coaches. I'm just lucky. They're lucky because I made them, but I was lucky to have two really good ones back to back.
Can I ask you this? How would Rondé Barber do in today's NFL with the way all the rules are and everything is kind of an advantage for the offense right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've talked to some younger wide receivers, and they're like, "You couldn't cover me." I'm like, "Of course I could cover you. I'd find a way. I'd above the neck your ass somehow." Because it was never a physical challenge, physical advantage for me. Never, ever. I outsmarted people. And, Ari, if you just go look at my highlight film, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I am. If you go look at my highlight film, a lot of plays I made, they looked easy. And so my buddy Brian Radigan, his daughter's like 9 years old, 10 years old, and I get into Hall of Fame. She's looking in her dad showing her my highlight film, and she goes, "God, the ball just comes to you all the time." Like, I'm like, yeah, it's preparation, opportunity, taking advantage, but that was the reality of me. Like, I wasn't ever going to try to be, more physical or fast or anything that, tangible that would make one player better than the other. I was going to be better prepared to make the plays that I needed to make. And so I was talking to this young wide receiver a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, he's like, "You couldn't cover me." I was like, "You know what, dude? You're not the only person that handles a ball in every particular snap." Like, I spent so much time studying quarterbacks. Receivers matter, yes, because obviously that's my physical matchup. But quarterbacks have to get you the ball. And so if you go back and watch some of my interceptions, and you're like, man, he's there right as the ball gets there. It's the quarterback. I don't give a damn what the receiver does. So how would I adjust? I'd probably play it the same way I played it when I was playing 12, 13 years ago. Anticipation, educated guesses, being prepared, and then knowing when those opportunities are coming. That's what made me a great player. It wasn't the physical aspect. You said 5'10". I'm really like 5'9" and 5'8" and 183 pounds or 82 pounds when I was playing. I wasn't big, but I was ahead of the game, and that will always win for me.
I want to ask you about one receiver you went up against a lot. Like, you went up against so many great ones. I don't know if this is true. You'll tell me if I'm right. I would argue Steve Smith was your favorite matchup. Am I right or wrong?
I knocked my mic down because you said that. Steve Smith was, other than maybe Hines Ward, and Hines Ward wasn't the quality of player that Steve was in terms of everything that he could do. But I like to think that Steve was a little bit of a version of me on the other side of the ball. He was gritty. He was going to do whatever it took to beat you, not to win, to beat you. And he didn't care about what it looked like, trying to get prepared for him. And, Jake Delhomme was his quarterback for a long time. Good buddies with Jake Delhomme. I always talk about how, Steve, you watch other teams and they'd run 15-yard in breaking route, and you'd be like, all right, he's going to hit that step. I can put my foot in the ground. I can drive on that. And great. Steve Smith would run the exact same route and get to the exact same spot, and it wouldn't look anything like a route that you could defend. And he was a master at it. Like, he worked the system to be perfectly in tune with the route concept, but it was not the route. And so it was impossible to cover him sometimes. And Steve was, you're somewhat a historian of the game. You'll understand this. You remember when teams used to just stand up, like they'd be a running play at the line of scrimmage, and quarterbacks would just stand up, throw the ball out to the receiver if the corner was off, and be like,
"Yep,
all right, go tackle that dude." That was Steve Smith for us, and that it was the hardest tackle I think I've probably ever had to make in football. Is when they just stand up, throw the ball out to him, and there's nobody else around you. It's just you and him, and you're basically just trying to turn him back to the cavalry. He's going to get 5 or 6 yards. And he changed the game a little bit for me, trying to cover a guy like him as opposed to, probably the toughest guy ever is Randy Moss, because, big, long, fast, just everything advantage guy. Steve was like as difficult in a totally different way. So people don't give him enough credit. You want a guy that should be on this show? It's that guy. I mean, obviously people understand what he was, and, his hubris has no bounds. but he deserved it. He was tough, man. He was really tough to play against.
I mean, I don't know if this makes sense, but just hearing you talk here throughout the interview, and I was trying to think of all the receivers you went up against and the way you think and the way you study and all those different things. I was trying to think of all the receivers. I'm like, this reminds me so much of Steve Smith. So I got to guess Steve Smith, and same division as well. And to hear you say all of that, it just adds up perfectly.
Right. Twice a year? Are you kidding me?
Twice.
Jesus. Yeah, I mean, but I played, Calvin Johnsons of the world, Roddy White's in Atlanta. Who are some of the other? We didn't play Cincinnati, but Ocho Cinco was around our time. Um, who are some of the other ones? Well, all the Minnesota receivers early in Randy's career when he had Chris Carter and Jake Reed. I mean, that was stupid. That was an impossible team to play against. Although Chris Carter made me a better player too, because when I was trying to develop how to play in the slot and some of the techniques that I needed to, to be able to be successful in there, it was covering Chris Carter that finally made me understand how to do it. It's like I have to be able to deal with his option routes, his ability to go in or out, but play underneath, so I'm not cut off from the run game. Like trying to figure that out and make plays on the ball was hard, but I figured it out because of Chris Carter. And so a lot of my interceptions, but actually 4 or 5 of them for touchdowns, are on routes that I used to have to cover with Chris Carter. There's option routes. I think I had one against Atlanta. I had one against San Francisco in a playoff game that ended up getting called back. One against New Orleans with the Aaron Brooks. It was one of those. It was the ability to figure out how to make those type of plays that made me a good player, and I needed to play against good players to do that. And Chris was the best, and he talked a lot of trash. Told me I needed to get better.
I'm well aware of how Chris talks trash. All right. Last 3 things here. Let's talk about the current Bucs here before I wrap it up. They're currently 3-1. They just beat the Eagles on Sunday. Of course, Philadelphia all loves Rondé Barber. But how far do you think this Tampa Bay team can actually go? I mean, it's so cool to see what Baker Mayfield has become, and all these players are really meshing together, and they're going to get back a lot of guys from injuries. Just curious to hear about this current team.
Yeah, Ari, I do these guys preseason, and I'm around them all the time. I work with them during the year as well, so I've got a pulse on a couple of teams. I am part of the heartbeat of this one, just because I'm around them so much. They're a good football team, and it always amazes me how people in the offseason discount good players. Jason Light at GM and John Spytek, Mike Beal, Mike Greenberg, Jackie, all these people, Rob, all the guys that work in the front office there, they very specifically put together a football team to become what they've been for the past 5 years, really. And yes, they had Tom Brady there that made it, look sexy and wow. But the reality is they're a very well put together football team. Like, they don't get credit for it. And it's kind of sickening to a degree, because if you look at who they have on their roster, I don't know how you can look at them and say they're not going to be good, right? You have Mike Evans, who's a freaking first ballot Hall of Famer. You have Chris Godwin, who might literally have the best hands in football. He had a catch last week against Philly. People that care, go back and find it. It was like a 3rd and 10 or something, and Baker double clutches and throws it into this coverage area, and Chris goes in and grabs this ball, and you're just like, if you don't have like sticky hands, you're not making this catch. They had good tight end, got 2 good running backs. You have a great offensive line. Now, Luke Gedeke, right tackle, is hurt, but other than that, they are really good on offense. So I don't understand how you can look at that team and say they're not going to at least be productive on that side of the ball. And then what Todd Bowles is on defense. I mean, he's maniacal in the way that he finds ways to get pressure on people. And that started, I remember he was in Arizona with Bruce Arians, and he didn't have any players. Like, they were not good. They probably had 2 or 3 players that you could say were, starting caliber players. And he's like, I remember him telling me, he goes, Rondé, we have to manufacture ways to do it. I was like, why does your defense do this, do that? And he's like, we have to manufacture it. Well, that has evolved over the last 10 years into this very complex, but kind of beautiful way of playing defense, where it doesn't matter who's in there. Now, if you get good players like Antoine Woodfield Jr. To be probably the most versatile player in football, and you get a Levante David, who is easily, thanks to you for saying so, Ari, the most underrated player in football, You have a Yaya Diaby, who you drafted last year, who's going to be a good player, and a Vita Vea, who is by far the best freaking nose tackle in football. They're going to be good. Like, I don't understand why people keep thinking they're not going to be good. And then all they go out and do is play good teams and beat them. Yes, they have Philly's number, but they have what you need to win. And obviously that starts with Baker. Baker is a catalyst. He is a spark plug. There's so many different ways that you can describe him. Against Philly, he was surgical. Against Denver, when they lost 2 weeks ago, he was very hesitant. And I think it was because he got hit so many times in Detroit in week 2 that he just didn't want to let the ball go. But if you go back and watch the difference between week 3 Denver, week 4 Philly, you're going to see Baker that's like, okay, I have a lot of talent. I'm going to trust my talent to try, instead of trying to do this by myself. And that's what you get. You get a 33-16 win, and it probably could have been, 45 if they wouldn't have had 2 or 3 drops on some other big opportunities. It's a good football team, and they're well coached. They're put together well. We should not be surprised that they're 3-1 at this point. Anybody that says otherwise, that they're going to win 2 games or 3 games like they were saying last year, are just idiots. They won a Super Bowl, and they've won 3 straight divisions. That's saying something.
I mean, it all goes back to what we started this entire conversation about, Tampa Bay just not getting credit, where it's like every single year people try to discount them as if they're not good. You mentioned what people said last year before the season started. I mean, you mentioned the front office people there, from Jason to Mike to John and everybody else there. Yeah. They've been there forever. I mean, they build a really good roster. They know how to draft. They know how to find people in free agency, and it works. And I don't know why they keep on mentioning these other teams in the division who make these splashy moves to get all the attention, that they could be better. Then the season starts, and here we are back talking about Tampa Bay as a really, really good team. Rondé, there are so many things I could talk to you about still. We're running short on. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me finish one more thought before you go, because I would hate myself if I didn't say this. So we mentioned that how they built their roster. We started this talking about Levante, and I am that man. Do you know what that means? Have you heard that before from the Tampa Bay Bucs?
One second. Before you even mention it, when we did the Levante interview, the first thing I showed him was that video of Jason talking about the player they're looking for is Levante. He started you saw the chills go through his body when I was showing it to him.
That's not only is it Levante, it's all the guys that they have on the roster. And I remember a couple of years ago, I don't know how long ago it was, when they made that change and made that their mantra about how to draft players and how to pick up free agents. Yes, it's Levante, but to actually be able to go out and do it and resist the urge and temptation to go find somebody that might not fit into you, that's hard. That takes discipline, and it takes a real vision. And I think that's the reason why they're successful. I mean, I don't think. Time out. I don't think. I know that's the reason why they're successful. And they don't get enough credit for it. And that's a shame that people don't realize that their way is the way. And they just keep having success because of it. That's all.
Well, it's 100% true. I mean, I'm sure Jason loves the fact that his entire front office is still there, but I think there are a few people in that front office who should be GMs right now, and they don't get any attention at all. I'll just say that.
I totally agree.
It's a very well put together organization. All right, last thing here. This is the NFL Spotlight Show. We put a spotlight on people in the league who deserve more recognition. Rondé, you could pick a player, a coach, an executive, former, current, whatever you want. Is there anyone in the NFL who you think deserves to be in this seat in the future?
Oh, I can give you a lot of those. One for sure is one of my ex-players, teammates, Mike Allstott. People don't remember how good Mike Allstott was. It's a shame. Tampa people know. They for sure know. And I guarantee you, if you put on him on this show and throw on some highlights of him, people around the league are going to be like, yeah, damn, yeah, he was pretty good. Like, he was like special good. Like John Riggins good. But anybody, like, normally, I think about, who should be on this show, that, if it's a current player, I'm thinking about a DB, probably like like a Jesse Bates, although I guess he's kind of starting to establish himself. Derek Stingley, he's a great player. Not a lot of people know about him. He plays in a small market like Tampa, but had 5 interceptions his second year. I kind of discounted him until I accidentally rolled across some tape on him, and I was like, wow, this guy's really good. He's like a really good football player. But let's see, executive Mike Greenberg is my buddy. He's managed a cap that had to accommodate for the greatest quarterback of all time with no money, and now they're in great cap shape. Like, guys like that deserve attention. So I can make a list and send it to you, Ari.
I love it. I mean, you gave us 3 choices there. Those are all excellent. I mean, I don't think people truly realize what Mike Greenberg has done in Tampa Bay with the cap. Like, for years, Tampa Bay never used to push money into the future. When Tom came, they did that, and eventually they had so much dead money last year. They signed Baker to that very cheap contract, and they still make it to the playoffs, win a playoff game. And now, for people who understand the cap, Tampa Bay's salary cap situation is in such a good position. So Mike deserves a lot of credit. Derek Stingley's an up-and-coming corner, will probably get paid after this season. And Mike Allstott, we're going to start to push for the Hall of Fame. We're going to get him moving over here. We will try to get him on the show as well. Rondé, I really want to thank you for coming on here. This was awesome. So much good information. Thank you for going through your journey. Everything was amazing. There's still so much more I could talk about, but this was awesome. I really appreciate it. And I think our listeners are going to, they for sure enjoy listening to this, and they're probably going on YouTube right now to try to look at some Rondé Barber highlights. So thank you so much, Rondé.
Thank you. I appreciate you, buddy.
Special thanks to Rondé Barber for joining us here on today's special Tuesday Spotlight guest. That was probably one of my favorite interviews that we've done so far. I mean, Rondé really goes into detail, gives really good answers to everything, and even just the way he talks about his film study and how he studied the quarterbacks and other receivers and all these different things, talking about the current day Buccaneers, his career, his numbers, how he was underrated. I mean, like, listening to him talk, like I told him at the very end, I could have gone an hour and a half with him. Like, there were so many other topics that we did not even get to. And he was just amazing. I'm sure everyone who listened to that interview really enjoyed it as well.